With that, let me introduce the first plenary panel today. And we have an all-star lineup. And I'll invite them to the stage as I call them out. Iav Bojinov from the Business School, who does research and teaching on Gen AI. He's just finished teaching a course with Kareem and several other faculty on Gen AI for managers using Gen AI. So I guess this is the first AI native course at the Business School. Chris Stubbs, who alternates between excitement and despair, depending on which minute you're talking to him, or sometimes within the same sentence. And he told me a couple of weeks ago that his productivity in his research side has increased 10x with Gen AI. Third is Nonie Lesaux, who is not just an educator and wears that hat, but also is the recently announced dean of the Harvard School of Education. And in that role is driving institutional change in that school and helping many of the others. And finally, Rebecca Nesson, who's going to serve as moderator, who can weave together a conversation on computer science, AI, and linguistics, as well as anyone I know, and serves as the academic dean at the engineering school. Please give them a big round of welcome, and thank you all.
Okay, welcome everyone. I am delighted to be leading us in this conversation about generative AI and teaching and learning and our classrooms. Before we get into talking with our panelists, we just want to take a minute to get all of you involved a little bit and give all of us a sense of where we stand within this room. Generative AI came on like a freight train, and it wasn't something that all of us as teachers and students were out there clamoring for, even though it is extremely useful in a bunch of different ways. So just want to take a minute to get a sense of how all of us are feeling about some of the main things that happen as students and teachers, as we're all trying to individually make our decisions about how it ought to be incorporated in education. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to ask 3 questions that are of the form: is it appropriate or okay to use generative AI to blank? And if you think the answer is yes, I want you to raise your hand. And it's very important that if you think the answer is yes, you do raise your hand, because the only way we'll know about who thinks it's no is by those who don't have their hands in the air. So here we go. Is it appropriate or okay to use generative AI to summarize reading materials that are provided to you as preparation for a class or a meeting instead of reading them? Please raise your hand if you think the answer is yes. Take a look around you. There's a lot of hands in the air, and there are some hands not in the air. Okay, everybody's hands down. Is it appropriate or okay to use generative AI to write a letter of recommendation? Hands up if you think the answer is yes. Okay, slightly fewer. Hands down. Is it okay to use generative AI to do a first pass assessment of student written work? Hands up if you think the answer is yes. Okay, thank you all for that. It's interesting to see. And as expected, there is a large diversity in this room of opinion on these 3 questions. And additionally, I would say that we can read into that there is a lot behind the answers to those questions that shows difference in people's beliefs about what generative AI is good for, and people's ethical principles about what should and shouldn't be done in education. And all of that feeds into our decisions as students and as teachers about how we want to use it. So we're now going to hear from 3 very distinguished panelists about their experiences as teachers, institutional leaders, and scholars of education and hopefully help us reflect a little bit on our own feelings about this. We'll have a little bit of time at the end for some audience questions, so keep in mind if there's something that you would like to ask that you think would be really interesting to everyone here to hear the answer to. So I'd like to start with Iav. You teach an AI native course at Harvard Business School, the first AI native course at Harvard Business School. I'm not even sure I entirely know what that means, so it would be great if you could share with us what that means, both for you as a teacher and for your students. And maybe if you could also tell us a little bit about how you determined where and how to integrate generative AI in your lesson plans and activities for the students. And any takeaways you'd like to share.
Great. So thank you so much, and thank you for inviting me on this panel. Let me start off by saying what isn't a Gen AI native course. And for that, I want us to cast our minds back to 2023. And this was the first time at Harvard Business School that we added a data science course as part of our required curriculum. So this is a first year, all of our MBA students take exactly the same course. And the course was, we were given 12 sessions to teach our MBA students the basics of data science. And we'd been working, and it's not just me, a whole team of people, were working on this course for several years, building it out. And at the time, when we started working on this in 2021, if you asked me the question of, do MBA students need to code? The answer was yes. Everyone needs to know how to code because that is the language of data science, and you can't really do data science in Excel. And so, we've been working on this course for 2 years, piloting it, working really hard to develop all the material, get ready for it. And then obviously ChatGPT comes out in 2022. Everyone's freaking out about it. What does it mean for assessment? And I'm just sitting back saying, oh, this doesn't bother me. I'm teaching them data science. They don't need to write essays for my class. It's fine. But then in the summer, ChatGPT launches advanced data analytics, which allows you to do data science in ChatGPT. So you could upload a data set and you could get it to actually write Python code. It was basically splits up a Cloud's Jupyter notebook, writes Python code, executes it. And so suddenly in the summer, you could actually start doing data analysis in ChatGPT. Now, as much as I love the AI sandbox, that capability was not ported over, and there was no plan to do that anytime soon. And so I pushed my colleagues, and Jan Hammond at the time was the course head, to run an experiment with us, this was before ChatGPT Enterprise, to try to give ChatGPT to all of our students that were taking this course. And so there was no mechanism to buy this. We essentially reimbursed all of this. They purchased their own private accounts, and then we reimbursed them. And so in parallel, we were doing this course, and then we gave them this extremely powerful tool and said, play around with it. And that was an example of a non-AI native course, because even though we gave them the right tools, we didn't think about how to integrate it. But the biggest learning from that course was, well, there were two really big learnings, which was the coding was distracting from learning data science, because we wanted them to think statistically and to be able to reason with data and use their judgment on data. And coding was just distracting. And they could actually do the coding using generative AI. And so then Karim Lakhani, who you just saw a moment ago, came in as course head, and we worked with him very closely to try to reimagine and to come up with what does it mean to actually build an AI native course. And we spent a lot of time thinking about this question, and we realized that it's, of course, you need to get the right technology, and in a moment I'll tell you a little bit about the technology that we used in the course, but you then need to figure out how to interweave it into everything that you are doing. So it's not just a little tool on the side, it's actually part of the conversation, it's part of how they prepare for class, it's how they get their questions answered when they have questions, it's what they use to do our quizzes, and so they have projects on it, they have group work, etc. And so it had to be integrated into every part of it, and because this is the business school, we also talked a lot about how does AI and generative AI impact the strategy and operations of organizations. And so maybe just very briefly, I have a couple of quick slides just to give you a sense of what we built. Maybe if you just advance, then you'll see the picture. Perfect. And so we had 3 different tools that we used in the course. We used ChatGPT, which was our generalist. This was used for, we had them doing projects like building custom GPTs, We had them building a whole company using generative AI. So that was all using ChatGPT. And then we did all of the data science using a specialized tool called Julius AI that we were actually, I believe, their first B2B customer. They're a small startup, and they worked with us to bring this tool to all of our students. So it's a great tool for data analysis. And then we also had our tutor bot, which basically replaced, we didn't have actual teaching fellows, we just used this tool. So this was a RAG system built by our digital transformation team at HBS, which had all of our cases, so they could go and ask questions of the cases as part of their preparation. But it also had all of our technical material. And if we go to the next slide, you can just see the usage. This is week over week. So we had 100% adoption of Julius and 63% adoption. That means 63% of the students used it at least once. This is our graph on sort of month by month, week by week. And you can tell the course was very sort of data science heavy in the beginning, a little bit more on strategy. You can see week 7 was our spring break, so massive dip. And then preparation for the exam was the final week. And for context, so we had about 126,000 unique messages go through Julius. We've got about 1,000 students, so you're looking at about 130 messages a person, which is a lot. And then we also had, 6,000 messages from the course bot. And there were a lot of learnings. We're still waiting to get, for context, we just finished teaching 2 weeks ago. So we're still waiting to get the final feedback. But in some of our early surveys that we did ourselves, we've seen people are very positive about these tools. But, and this is something we really need to address, it made it so easy for them to cheat. And what I mean by this is a lot of students even came to me and they said, well, these tools are so powerful and I can just copy paste things. And so do I really need to learn these things? And this actually is something we're thinking really hard about. We did a lot of things to try to push them. So we would have multiple quizzes every other week, which were designed so that if you just copy pasted the answers, sometimes they would just give you the wrong answers. So that would sort of teach them that these tools are very powerful, but they can push you in the wrong way. And so we have a ton of learnings around, yes, this can definitely replace coding for MBA students who don't need to know how to code, but we have to think really hard about how do we make sure that they're still learning the core concepts and they're not, just finding the easy way out, right? I think we learn a lot by persevering, and these tools make it a little bit hard. So I can go on for hours, but I should probably stop there.
Well, thank you. And I want to particularly put a pin in that thought about how we get students to learn things that we think it's important for them to learn, and how we convince them that those things are important to learn. I am going to come back to that shortly with Chris. But right now, I just want to note that it makes so much sense in your course for these students doing this work and planning to build companies to be really practicing that and learning to do it with AI, because they're going to need to do it. But in lots and lots of our situations where we're teaching and learning, it's less clear that it's an advantage for the learners or for the teachers to bring AI into the classroom. So, Nonie, I want to ask you to reflect on the present and think a little bit forward into the future on what is the kind of potential future for generative AI working or not working for learning in K-12, college, and graduate education? And also, do you think that it benefits or harms all learners equally, or are there important differences we need to attend to?
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for the invite, and glad to be here. There's lots we can say in response to that question, and even building just from this last thread. So I want to talk for a minute then about the learners and who we have in front of us and what it might mean. And by that I might also say a little about scale. So lots to say about the potential upsides and downsides as we think about learners and what they need. I would say this. I want to put one conjecture forth before I say a few things about AI in particular. We are having this conversation at a time when our learners at scale across age groups are actually experiencing very real challenges in what we refer to as self-regulation and executive functions. That is, skills that are really essential for learning, for problem solving, for success in school and everyday life. Self-regulation, not to be too technical, it's sort of about monitoring and controlling and guiding one's own learning and behavior, and especially emotions, to regulate, right, in order to achieve goals. So we need effective strategies, and we need to monitor our progress and reflect on it. Executive functions are sort of this set of cognitive skills that help learners really manage their specific thoughts, their actions. It's very, very much instantiated in planning and organizing, managing impulses in particular, right? Inhibiting, inhibitory control, if you will, resisting distractions. So even before the global pandemic, I'm someone who's been looking at longitudinal data on learners for a long time, child age and adolescent. There were very real concerns before the pandemic. I will also say that none of us are exempt from these trends in this room. We were concerned. We had seen, real challenges to these skills and developing these skills in the learner population. We then saw precipitous declines during the pandemic, and it's very clear from a number of studies, including one of my own, which was a first of its kind population-based study in this area. This is not about recovery, because it wasn't just about the pandemic. We have a very different learner in certain ways on our hands, even in the last, say, 15 years, if you look at the data. So we have a cognitive and emotional profile that we want to think about when we're thinking about designing learning environments, and where a tool with tremendous upside and downside comes into play, like AI. So I think, for, big picture, the design challenge here is we want to support our learners actually to go deeper, to slow down. We need to be clear that access to information is not the same as learning, and it is certainly not the same as active learning and sustained learning. We want them to manage their impulses and sort of cultivate more control over their learning, while, of course, driving their creative thinking, their cognitive flexibility, their critical thinking. So I think really it's this across the education sector writ large, from our settings with our youngest learners through to our higher ed settings. I think there's this question of how does it truly become the tool to drive into the human-centered tool to drive into the learning that we know our students so desperately need, particularly, ironically, in the context of AI, which is to say, right, all of the employers, all of the sector is telling us even more human skills, please, because we have the technology. And yet, in some ways, the technology pushes on those, because AI is going to trend towards access to just more information, which isn't necessarily the challenge. It's going to trend towards the right answer, when in fact we want the system to push against that kind of thinking and those kind of reflexes to get quick answers. So, I have tremendous excitement about possibilities. I think the only other thing I'll say is that in a lot of ed sectors, including, from the earliest but through to the higher ed sectors, we have struggled with what we call cognitive press. We have struggled as a sector to bring really rich content, really rich learning experiences, very abstract, to students at scale. And there's where I see also a lot of upside potential, right? Lots of educators, millions of educators around the globe trying to get access to rich content and ideas. And so now the question is, how do we help them use the tool in ways that then drives the pedagogy? So lots to think about. And I think you're right about your last question, or your last stem of the question was, about disparities. I think we have some early and clear learnings from the MOOC, which we thought might be a strategy for more access and more equitable learning. And I think that hasn't panned out. And I think we want to have sort of that as the cautionary tale, which is you can imagine much more easily as an educator really high quality settings, pulling AI in as a tool, settings that have a really strong architecture for learning in the first place, right? Who have a lot of supports and resources to drive into and real clear goals and quality learning experiences, adopting this much more easily and readily than those who we worry the most about, which is the isolated practitioner in front of students for whom they're totally dependent on the system to thrive and grow as learners.
Thank you. I think you've put some incredibly difficult teaching challenges in front of us to think about whether, in what way we might deploy AI to help with them is something I hope Chris will have some ideas about. Let's see. So Chris has also taught a course to undergraduates about AI and heavily using AI. I don't know whether you would use the term AI native, but you can tell us, as well as leading the efforts in the Faculty of Arts and Sciences to have our faculty and our whole community think carefully about how AI should change our research and our teaching practices. And I'm just wondering if you would comment on what you've experienced, how it seems similar or different to what Iav describes at HBS, and what things or learnings you might like to share from your own experience.
Sure. So first of all, thanks to the organizers. I think this is just a great session, and thanks to all of you for coming. I'll make a couple of points, maybe more than a couple. The first one is the pace at which this whole thing is moving is completely incompatible with our pace of change within higher education. And I'll give you an example. It was, I guess, 2023 or something when it dawned on me that this was going to be a really big deal. And me and my colleague Logan McCarty said, oh my God, we have to teach a course next fall about what this means for liberal arts. And the answer that we got from the school that I inhabit was, oh, I'm really sorry. The deadline for applications for new courses was like, 2 months ago, and boy, you are just so late there. But maybe in the spring, maybe if you really hustle, we can, think about. So we hustled and we, term late, managed to institute a course. Really, my attempt to force myself to grapple with what this meant for the liberal arts education writ large. How do we prepare our students for the world that they're going to enter? How do we grapple with both the opportunities and the challenges that this presents to us? So let me turn to just a couple of slides, Nick, if we could, to highlight some points. So one point is there's clear early indications that if used wisely and appropriately in the classroom, these tools can improve student learning and increase student engagement. So we're lucky to have someone named Greg Keston who's sitting right there. Come on, Greg, stand up. This is Greg's data. So Greg, by context, Greg is one of the most accomplished and effective instructors that we have in STEM in the FAS, okay? So all the comparative data that I'm about to show you is against someone who is one of our best classroom instructors. So on the right-hand side is a histogram that compares sort of with and without GPT as an augment to instruction, and you can see shifting to the right, improvements in student learning if these tools are used judiciously. There's evidence to the contrary, which is if you just say to students, go use GPT and do your coursework, it's actually arguably disadvantageous to their learning, right? So it's really this fusion of expertise in this technology that's going to propel things in a positive way. And that's a broad theme for me. On the left-hand side is the student's own self-impression of their engagement with the material. So not only does it improve their learning, but it improves their engagement. And that chart, better is to the left, okay? So it looks like this is going to be really positive for us. On the other hand, it presents us with profound challenges. In many ways, it undermines the way we've done everything traditionally, right? If this is such an incredibly seductive shortcut for any homework assignment I have ever given in introductory physics, how do I instill in students the motivation to actually do the hard work to get them to a deeper level of domain mastery? And so one indicator that I'll give you in the next overhead, so I'm on the admissions committee for graduate admissions. Can we do the next slide? There we go. So typical application essays in astrophysics. Typical application essays in astrophysics start by saying, ever since I was an unborn child in my mother's womb and I looked up at the night sky, I dreamed about the stars, and then there'd be a few paragraphs about what they did as an undergraduate, and then there'd be the obligatory custom-crafted paragraph about why Harvard is the right place for them to go to graduate school. This is literally cut and pasted from a graduate application where the Graduate School of Arts and Sciences prohibits use of generative AI in preparing applications, okay? So A, this person did not get admitted, okay? They never bothered to even fill in the blank or proofread their application. And if ever there was an indicator that narrative is no longer a reliable indicator of communication proficiency or competence, here's a clear example. How do we select everybody in this institution? Predominantly narrative expression in one way or another, either through letters of recommendation, but for those of you who raised your hands, I'm never going to believe a letter that you submit anymore in the future, and narrative generated by people. It was probably never a really reliable proxy indicator anyhow, but if ever it was, no longer, right? So how do we adapt? What do we do differently? How do we select the kind of people that we want to bring to Harvard? So this is now me shifting from optimist to pessimist. And so I think we have in parallel many experiments underway at Harvard. One of them in the business school is a very structured approach to embedding generative AI in the school's objectives, but I inhabit the FAS, which is a rather more diverse and freedom of expression kind of vibe. So let me show you a chart that shows you part of our challenge. So if you go and you ask, in the catalog of instruction and the syllabi for the courses in Harvard College, how many of them have a clearly articulated course policy about the use of generative AI in that particular course? And from the fall of 24, you can see our attempts to instill in the Harvard FAS faculty a sense of obligation to articulate a clear policy to our students essentially failed. Okay? And even this last spring, for courses that are ending now, in the flagship general education courses that we think are an important core part of the liberal arts experience, a large number of them did not have an articulated generative AI policy. So have the faculty, by and large, you know, you would hope not only would they declare a policy, but it might even be a thoughtful policy that's in alignment with learning objectives of the course. We have not really achieved that, okay? So I'm telling you, we have a long way to go in having our colleagues really appreciate what this means, to rip down to the studs what it is we're trying to accomplish in the education that we give our students, and then build it back up again using the positive aspects of this technology while we're attuned to its negatives.
Thank you for that. I want to pick up on a couple of the themes from what you said.
You can take that down now.
And open it to each of you to potentially answer these questions. The first one I want to go for is the one that I know many of us have thought about over and over again, and there aren't great answers. It's the how do we motivate students to learn and do their work when they can so effectively cheat, as Iav put it, or get it done in a way that is adequate or similar to what they might have done if they had done it themselves. So how do we, and I guess I would say that the implicit argument here is something that Chris said, which is that actually, I don't know if you said it here, but you said it when we were preparing, which is that that the most effective use of generative AI is by people who have deep expertise to direct the use of the tools. So just put it as a baseline that we presume that it's still important for all of us as educators to help our students develop deep expertise. And now that's more challenging than it was. So what are our strategies for addressing this? And maybe it's okay to start with you, Nonie?
Sure. You know, I think I'm certainly just one person, and there's a few ways to think about this. One is, I think in some ways, it pushes on all of us as educators on the assessment itself, which is, so if they can cheat, is that thinking and learning anyway? Like, is that sort of just, you know, does that count in the way that we might think developmentally about our learners? And so with that, you know, the field has long struggled to design really effective assessments of active learning, of engaged learning, of deeper learning, right? You know, we have been thinking about this a little, and one line of thought is really about the iterative process of learning, which then also fits with sort of like the skills we're trying to cultivate. So one route to go down would be to say, you know, what are the multi-step, over time, iterative assessments of learning that just can't easily be short-circuited, that we can't outsource that kind of thinking, per se, to the machine. That's one piece. So just, you know, what are the assessments that are, and what about the personalized pathways rather than sort of using AI just as a tool for generally for learners? Where does AI fit in a more iterative approach? It's more personalized, it's less scalable. You know, that's one answer. I think another answer has a whole lot to do with where the collaborative piece comes in, right? So we have historically similarly struggled to really engage our students in very authentic collaborative learning experiences and then also evaluate those. So those are a couple thoughts.
Yeah, thank you. I'm thinking about it a little bit in the context of teaching proof-based mathematics, which is what I teach, and that at this point it's a field of research to try to generate questions that can stump AI, even at the truly expert level.
Yeah.
So it's definitely a tricky enterprise to figure out how you would get there. Iav.
Yeah, maybe I think in the business school we have a little bit of an advantage because a lot of our sessions are conversational. So we rarely come in and lecture, we come in and we have some questions and then we have a discussion. And so a lot of our grading actually comes from the comments that the students make in class. And so even if they're using tools to prepare for themselves, they still need to actually reason and listen to the conversation. And sometimes you'll notice some students who, you know, maybe haven't really prepared and have just used Gen AI to just come up with one comment that they want to say, and they're not listening to each other, they're not building, they're not thinking critically. And so I think here we have an advantage over, say, FAS and other places where it's a lot less, it's more sort of lectures, it's a lot less grading around how people speak in class. So I think that's one possibility, is to move to a system that encourages a lot more interaction. But again, I don't think that works everywhere.
I do really love that answer, though, because it just would be very nice if where we ended up was with very highly interactive teaching. Chris, I'm wondering if I can ask you a different question, which is, you've showed us this chart that shows all these faculty who haven't put up a policy, and they didn't do it when we told them they had to. I'm wondering if you could speak to the teachers and the learners and the scholars out there who just don't want AI in their classrooms. You know, it's like, it doesn't appeal to them at all. What would you say to those people?
More power to you. I mean, I think the fundamental precept that instructors are in the best position to decide what the right thing is to do in their classroom is a pretty bedrock principle. There are some currents within FAS that say we should dictate some top-down policy, and half the people say you should ban it, and half the people say you should make it obligatory, right? So I think that shows you that there's no one-size-fits-all policy here. I think as long as those people come to an informed and thoughtful conclusion, I'm totally happy, right? I am absolutely fine if there are courses in FAS that say using these tools is inconsistent with our learning objectives. Here's why. I've thought about it, and here's how we're going to do it. That's great. I just feel like maybe those people have not yet, in some cases, invested the intellectual effort to really appreciate in an ongoing and dynamic way, keeping up with the technology, what it actually means for their learning objectives, because I think honestly it forces you to confront a hard question, which is just exactly what am I trying to do in this course? How am I trying to influence student thinking? How am I going to assess it? And how are we going to know if we succeeded? So I'm totally fine with that. I think that it's certainly true that in the domain, to pick up on the point you made, you might think this is all about courses where writing is a big part of what we do, a big integral part. That's because I think we give that a bad name. We don't really teach writing, we teach thinking, right? And there's just something about grappling with material, forcing yourself to create a narrative, revising it, and going through that iterative process that historically we think is a useful part of a liberal arts education. But it's every bit as true in the sciences as it is in other domains, right? We face exactly the same problem. You know, let me back up and answer your question. How do we incentivize students in Harvard College to do what we want? My short answer is grades. So the course that I'm going to teach in the fall, which is Introductory Extragalactic Astronomy and Cosmology, should all come, it's going to be great, is going to have an embedded, you know, Jupyter Notebook, embedded AI, cutting edge data analytics component to it, where we show people where these tools fail. We convince them that you actually have to know stuff in order to succeed. Now, there's a pitfall. That's true right now today. 5 years from now, how true is that? I don't know, but I live today. I'm going to worry about the fall term. And there's going to be a final exam. It's going to have no electronics. It's going to be sit down with a blue book and show me that you learned stuff. And if we're going to do that on the final, we'd better scaffold it along the way in the homework assignments and say, I encourage you to use generative AI for this set of problems, and I encourage you to not use it for these problems. Whether you do or not is up to you, but you're going to see things like this on the final exam, and if you choose to use generative AI as a shortcut, you're going to regret it, and the midterm is going to teach you that lesson. Okay? That's my, I don't know, what do you think? Yes? No? That's my plan.
So I agree with you that there's something really wonderful about the freedom that we give to our faculty to figure out what they're going to teach and how they're going to teach it. But I just want to push a little bit on what you say about it's totally fine to just have a no AI policy. Do you think that we have a responsibility as educators, and or say more about what responsibility you think we have as educators to get our students ready or get our students thinking about using AI, especially considering that they are not all equally ready when they come in, and they're all going to have to be facile with it when they come out.
Yeah, I didn't say we should do that for every course. I think one of the things that we learned in that overview liberal arts course that we taught is that this was already hard, but now it's extra hard. And that is, how do you do truth assessment? We were already in a world where people were flooded with information with differing amounts of veracity and evidence-based grounding. And these tools heighten that problem. In that way, I think it's, you know, one of the things that happened during COVID was it shone the spotlight on a lot of weaknesses in our healthcare system, in our economic system, in our childcare system. And similarly, I think this shines a spotlight on things that were already problematic and accentuates them. And so to my mind, in answer to your question, in some ways, I think our most profound obligation is to equip our students with a sense of healthy skepticism, of grounded in some, you know, domain knowledge and core values that help them assess validity and truth in the world in which they're going to live. I think that's a profoundly hard challenge, and I'd love to see our institution take a leadership role in helping our education figure that part out.
Yeah, and I would just add to that and say, you know, I think what we're also saying is that the stakes on what it means to be metacognitive continue to raise, which is to say you need to be constantly, as a learner, reflecting, evaluating, critiquing. And I don't think historically, right, we have been great as a sector in instantiating those skills. That takes a lot of, a different kind of learning environment. It takes a very active learning environment. It sort of has a very human-centered feel and approach, and you're really cultivating those critical thinking skills. I think the stakes couldn't be much higher than they are now on how to sort of operate in that frame.
Iav, just when we were chatting before the session, we were talking a little bit about teachers who are not themselves feeling very comfortable with how to use AI. And I wonder if you would share some thoughts about what to do if you're one of those people who feels the responsibility and the desire, but doesn't yet feel like you know how to change your teaching.
It's a really good question, a really hard question, because I think a lot of us educators have not put in the time to learn these tools and to understand the limitations and the opportunities. And I think the biggest ask for me is you have to do this now. It's AI is everywhere. It's transforming everything, and it's kind of your own responsibility to learn how to use it. But just to come back to, I think Chris, you were mentioning this, which is, these tools can be extremely powerful, but you can't just staple them onto a course and just say, I've been teaching this for 10 years. I'm going to allow AI. Great, go use AI. That doesn't work. And we saw this when we tried to add AI into our course without thinking about it. What you have to do is what you were saying, Chris, which is go back and redesign how you teach the core concepts, how you evaluate them. But you can't do that unless you understand what AI is capable of, or when it works well, when it doesn't work well. And so my ask is basically put in the time in exactly, and this is, by the way, this is exactly the same thing that's happening in every other organization. We've written a number of cases right now on companies trying to figure out what should they do with generative AI, what should they do with AI. And the biggest challenge they're facing is, they're doing sort of business as usual, and then they add a little bit of AI, and they're like, well, why doesn't this work? Why isn't this transforming everything we're doing? We added AI to it. But they didn't go back to the whole process. And here we have to think about what is the process of learning. And, it's going to take a lot of iteration. It's going to take a lot of experimentation. We're not going to get it right the first time. And I think we need to be okay with that. But we need to, the first step is to do something, right? I don't think we can. And at this stage, I don't think anyone can put their head in the sand and just say, this doesn't affect me, I don't need to worry about it, I don't need to learn it.
So I've had the extraordinary privilege of getting to ask the questions I want to these folks up here. While you all think for a minute about what question you want to ask, can I ask everybody to just give a round of applause to them for what they've shared? We do have time for a couple of questions from the audience. I don't know exactly our mechanism because I don't think we have microphones, so you'll just talk loud and I'll repeat your questions.
We do have mics. Oh, we do have mics right there.
We do have mics. Yes, there's mics at the corner. So let's, if people want to ask a question, why don't you just come to the microphone and ask.
It's a race.
Should be good. My name is Alan. I work at the school, actually, in the admissions office, and I maintain, manage, and report our admissions data. And one of the things that I saw from the slides is about the person who didn't fill out, the professor in the field, or whatever that second one was. And I've stumbled across that in some of our applications, too, and I'm wondering now, as an admissions office, if you Nonie, if you come into our admission space right now and be like, what are we doing with AI and how is it being utilized? It's a big question mark on our team, I think just for guardrail sakes, but an underlying question is, is the question who are we admitting, or is it what are we admitting now? Is it an AI bot or something like that? It's getting really murky now with a lot of the data that's coming in. So it's just entertaining that aspect, really, not really a question, but realm.
So I think if I have understanding, you're asking about what can we look at now when we receive an application? Thoughts?
I'm going to answer the question in a completely different way, and then someone can actually answer that question. It
might not be a question either.
So one of the exercises we did in our class is we said, we taught the students about AI agents. And then we said, okay, let's look at the whole process of how you get admitted into HBS. And you can think about it as I first become aware of the HBS and the program, then I write my application, and then someone internally reviews that application, and then someone goes and interviews me, and then after the interview, I get an offer, and then I have questions, and then I join. And so then we said, let's look at that whole system and try to understand what are we actually trying. And we did this in class with all 1,000 of our students, right? And we asked the questions of what should this process actually look like? And if you think about it, the whole point of this process is to learn about the person's interests, motivations, why they want to do this. And so we came up with the solution of why aren't we using an agentic system for conducting interviews for everyone. And so instead of writing something down, you just have a conversation with an AI system. And so my push would be, let's actually think about what we're actually trying to do, think about the technology that's out there, and then try to do it instead of looking at, are we admitting people right now based on what an AI system is saying? So I'm not really answering your question, I'm just saying, let's ask an even bigger question. And I think we can do this all across, not just how we bring students in, but basically almost every part of the education system.
Thank you. That's a brilliant answer.
Hi, Anthony from the LXP team in academic technology. I think one of the questions that comes up is how do we build cognitive redundancy? And what happens when these tools go down? What happens if these tools are unavailable? How do we function as a society? And not to make a generational comparison, but when you think of, if a popular website goes down, there are people that are accustomed to using online first and not necessarily picking up a phone and having a human interaction. So there are skills that definitely need to be taught, and we need to prepare for that, because without this development, we could have some very serious problems from a learning perspective and also from an economic perspective. So that's my comment.
Thank you. And let's take one more question, and this will be the last one, and we'll give you a chance to respond, and then we'll wrap up. Oh, sorry, I didn't realize there were two of you, but thank you for seating. We only have time for one.
Me, right? Okay, thank you for sharing. And my question is very simple. It's like, I think after the Gen AI come out, I think everything goes very, very fast because knowledge spread very, very, very fast than before. So I'm thinking that as a faculty, as a teacher, as an institution, or as a student, how do we overcome this anxiety because of Gen AI come out? Everything goes very, very fast.
Okay, I can go. So I'll go two really quick ones. First one, to the first question. During our final exam, our Gen AI Power 2 for data analysis went down because we had so much traffic and so many people using it. And so we had to jump on a last-minute call with, I think there were like 20 people, our IT group, the company we were using, and many, many other folks to try to figure out how we come back to this. I think this is, in the short term, this is a problem. In the long term, I don't think it is. Like, I think technologies like the internet and other general purpose technologies, they become so pervasive and so robust that I don't think we need to think too hard about fail safes for it. For the AI, how do you stay on top of it? I get this question all the time. It's really hard. There isn't really a good source of information around what is the latest and greatest thing and how things are changing. We try, in the Harvard Data Science Review, for example, regularly publishes articles on these topics, but even that can't move as quickly. And so personally, I just follow a lot of different blogs and a lot of different newsletters that try to keep me updated, but it's really hard.
Chris or Nonie, would either of you like to have a last word before we finish?
Thank you.
Thank you all.